Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad to see you all out here. It's nice and cool here on this hot last day of May. Thank you all for coming out. I'm glad to be here with you in person and via live stream, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation with Claude. You heard about my affiliations with the New York Historical Society and the Center for Fiction, and tonight you'll hear how some of these stories converge, so I'm really excited about that. Let me set the stage by giving you some information, some background about Claude. Claude Johnson is founder of the Black Fives Foundation. Prior to starting the foundation, he had a 20-year career in corporate America and held management and executive positions at IBM, American Express, NBA Properties, Nike, Fat Farm, and Benetton Sports System. He left that world and became a stay-at-home dad to his 3 sons. I'll let him tell you where his sons are now, and it has to do with sports. Along the way, Claude immersed himself in this really incredible history that's been lost to us. It wasn't that long ago, but I think most people hadn't heard about the Black Fives. But he immersed himself in the history of black basketball before the NBA was racially integrated in 1950. He collects artifacts. He does scholarly research at libraries and historical societies. He interviews descendants of the players. He's a sought-after speaker at schools. He's curated exhibitions and collaborates on apparel with companies including Puma, Nike, and the 47 brand. And now he's written a book. This is his first event. This is the official kickoff. The book was just published. The book was just published May 24th. That was last week. So though this book is not fiction, and we're here at the Center for Fiction, it really is fitting that this be the space where Claude does his first talk about the book. And that's because he used to come here to write. He wrote part of the book here before the pandemic. So Claude, congratulations. This has been a labor of love, and now we've got it. All right. Are you, come on up. Okay, so Claude, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
The Black Fives. How did you come to have this interest in black basketball?
Well, when I was working at the NBA, which was in 1996. That's the year that they claimed was the 50th anniversary of the league. I came across a book by Arthur Ashe, the tennis legend, that was called The Hard Road to Glory. And in that book, he talks about the 400-year journey of the African-American athlete. Mm-hmm. And part of that book is about basketball. And in that section, he talked about all these teams. And then at the same time, the NBA had an 800-page book that only had 3 pages on these earlier teams, and I just thought, how come I don't know about this? Like, how come nobody knows about this? And so that started my quest.
Wow. So that's 1996. So that's going on 20-something years. Well,
Yeah.
It'll be 20 years soon. It's a long time. Yeah.
Oh. Forgot the technical details.
So.
Is it on now? Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for that reminder.
So take us on the journey. You saw the Arthur Ashe book. You knew there was more to the story than what was out there at the time. You did a lot of research. You went to libraries. What I want to hear about, though, is I know people do research in libraries. I know people do interviews. But 10 years ago, you were using Ancestry.com. I find that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even before that, Laura, I was going into that led me to just first of all try to figure out how to even do research. Like, how do people do research? I tried to get in touch with some of the researchers that Mr. Ashe named and others. And I found out you have to go to the library. You have to go to the basement of the Schomburg and look at the microfilm. This was when you had to do it manually, look at every single page go by, and you had to have a bag of dimes because that's how you would put, get a copy of that page and take it home. And now, fast forward, everything is digitized, and so much is digitized. And what Laura's referring to is that the way we met is that the way that I'm do my research on these people who are in this book is that one thing that I did is create a family tree on Ancestry for each individual, because I wanted to know who are they, what did their parents do, where did they come from, what year were they born, what state did they move from when they came to Chicago or wherever. And somebody at the New York Historical Society,
Margie Hofer.
Yeah, also was looking, and when you create a family tree, it's public, and so anyone can see it. So then this person that I didn't know said, well, what are you doing, looking at this family tree, and what's the story? And we started talking and messaging, and she said, oh, well, we have this sampler, which is this unique, historically important item, and we're going to display it, and it's in that same family that you're talking about.
What was the family called?
So that was the
Wood family?
The family of a man named James Hoffman Woods, who was from Brooklyn, and he was an important figure in this book. And so the reason why that was so interesting to me is because I was always trying to get in touch with as many ancestors as possible. I mean, descendants of these ancestors as possible. So then that led to me standing there in the crowd, and I'm standing next to this guy, and he's like, so who are you? What are you doing? And I'm like, I got this box, that box of artifacts. And it turned out to be the chief curator of the museum. And he said, bring it in. And next thing you know, we have this major exhibition at the New York Historical Society, the first of its kind.
Yeah, so that was my introduction to the Black Fives. Why are they called the Black Fives?
Well, I came across, colored quints, Negro fives, and I just decided, Black Fives just resonates more.
So they weren't called Black Fives then,
They weren't
necessarily.
called Black Fives. They were called fives, Negro fives, colored fives, but yeah, it felt like. But fives because that's 5 players on a team.
How many players are on a team now?
Still 5, but at one point it was 9. It was more than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all this research, all this collecting led to this exhibition in 2014, right? Now, we're here at the Center for Fiction, and I know your book is not, it's nonfiction, but the type of research that you did is, to bring these players, characters to life, not just themselves, but also their family members, also the communities that they lived in, the jobs that they did. Bringing all of that to life is the same type of thing that fiction writers, I would imagine, have to do
Well, some of the things in here are stranger than fiction. So it's like sometimes when you start to really get into the facts of the storytelling and what's going on with these people, like I'll give you an example. The person I start with is a man named Will Anthony Madden. And I start the book by looking at this person who was buried in an unmarked grave. And but he started, then I go about talking about how he rose from poverty and he became the king of black basketball in old Greenwich Village, a section there called Little Africa, which is where most of the black people in Manhattan lived at the time.
I mean, that's news to a lot of people, that, Little Africa
there was even
existed.
such a thing.
Yeah.
And then, he was born in the 1880s and he died in the 1970s. He rose to this height and then lost it all. And then eventually, just before I won't give away the ending, but just before he died, there was this moment of redemption for him. But then I also discovered he didn't have a grave, and so this is not only the story of redemption and that he was buried in an unmarked grave, but also all this history effectively is buried in an unmarked grave. And so I just ordered a proper tombstone with an epitaph for Mr. Madden, that's going to be installed in a couple of weeks. And this book itself is like the proper tombstone, for this history. It's as heavy as a tombstone.
422 pages.
Yeah, 480 if you count all the endnotes.
Well, I didn't read the endnotes,
But if you want to find out something interesting, read the endnotes, because there's more than 1,300 endnotes. And there's 85 full-color photos. And also, it's just another good place to start is at the acknowledgments. Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, thank you to the Center for Fiction. I did some writing here before the pandemic, right here in this actual room when they were set up as a cafe. And I really appreciate this invite and to be here today. So thank you.
So let's stay on the topic of writing and the process, so that, because this place, we do everything from soup to nuts for writers and readers. Talk about the writing process. What were some of the big challenges that you had in bringing, these, I call them characters, but these historic figures to life?
Yeah, they are characters. When I first started this about 20 years ago, back then, I was just writing, chronological data, but it wasn't a story. And so, it took a long time for me to find out even like what is a voice, like what's my voice, but let alone what is a voice. And so that kind of came along over time to where I started to realize, there's a story here. And what is that story, and how to weave it together? And then another challenge is, so you mentioned I have 3 sons, and so I've got these 3 sons, and they're 22, 21, and 17. And so for a while I learned how to write a book like 2 minutes at a time, because like you have to just manage all these things at once, and then this one wakes up or that one comes home or whatever. So that was part of it. And then another part of it is just there's so much that this is almost really just the tip of the iceberg, even though it's like that many hundreds of pages. There's more. So that's part of it. And just, I think, my editor, Jameson Stoltz, I don't know if he's here, I don't think he made it, but he would always say, when are you going to get to the basketball? Because it was just, there's so much else in there.
There's a lot in here. You used to live in this neighborhood, right?
Yeah, I used to live in Brooklyn, yes.
Yeah, in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this neighborhood has been vibrant for a long time, right? And, it's been a literary hub with everyone from Walt Whitman to Ralph Emerson to, today's writers. So it's always interesting to me to think, wow, 100 years ago or more or longer, this was a vibrant hub. But it was a hub for the Black Fives too. So
right.
You had players playing right over here, a few blocks away on Carlton Avenue, or teams on Carlton.
Yeah.
Tell us about Brooklyn's role.
Yeah, so it's just appropriate that we're here in Brooklyn, for this first book talk, because the first official game between 2 independent African American basketball teams took place in Brooklyn at a court ironically called the Knickerbocker Court over on the corner of Gates and Knickerbocker Avenues over there in Bushwick. And Knickerbocker Court was a handball facility, because back then handball was the predominant pastime of Irish people. And but it was converted into a basketball court. And there were only about 100 people who came to that first game. The first game was, the score was 31-1. The team from Manhattan won this game. The only point was off of a made free throw.
Okay.
But that wasn't important, and I actually write about it, where the game was seen as so incredible of a breakthrough for race progress that score didn't matter. The score and the headlines were actually ran like what's that word I'm looking for? It was syndicated to other headlines around the country. So the game, even though it was 31-1, the headline said, teams play in great struggle for victory. And that's just because the context was quite astonishing. And that was when basketball caught fire. And there's a linkage to this area right here because the Carlton Avenue YMCA, right over on Carlton, was the first all-black YMCA in Brooklyn.
Really?
Back in around 1906. And the person who helped create that possibility was a philanthropist named George Foster Peabody, who is the eponym of the Peabody Award that you get in, like on PBS. Mm-hmm. But he was also eventually a trustee at Hampton Institute. So there's a link that I know you want to talk about.
Yeah.
And he, and all of these things, and the reason why that happened was because his stenographer was a guy who ran that YMCA, an African American man, and out of that YMCA came this first team that unfortunately only got 1 point, mm-hmm. but they were part of the vanguard.
What was that team called?
The Marathon Athletic Club.
Yeah. Well, because then you had all these other teams that came about. Now you talk about Lena Horne's grandfather, who started a team.
Yeah. So when during that time, Brooklyn was the home of all the middle-class, well-to-do, educated African American, let's say, black intelligentsia of New York City. There were a lot of people, a lot of those individuals were members at St. Augustine Protestant Episcopal Church, which was over next to Fort Greene. And they formed a club in 1904 called the Smart Set Athletic Club of Brooklyn. That's why I'm wearing this, because this is the Smart Set Athletic Club logo.
Okay.
So back when I was checking out Arthur Ashe's book and everything, I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And in my mind, I was like, okay, wait, I'm in licensing at the NBA, so I understood the idea of having a team name on your shirt or something on your shirt. So I thought, okay, I'm smart, I'm athletic, I live in Brooklyn, that's my club. But how is it that there's an all-black club in Brooklyn in 1904 that we don't know about it? So I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, what is this? But I envisioned eventually somehow making something out of this. And so a lot of what drives me is just trying to give voice to the voiceless. Mm-hmm. Like that's a big deal for me.
Yeah. It's amazing how this wasn't that long ago, but the history, evaporates just so quickly. And I would like to pull up the slide that he talked about. I'm the keeper of all the family albums, because I've never moved. I stay in one spot. And I was going through, I guess a year and a half ago, I was going through a family album. Thank you. And I saw this. Now, this photo has been in the family album, since 1912, I'm sure. But I never really paid attention to it. But this time when I opened it and I saw it, I had a new appreciation. I was looking at it with new eyes because of your work. I recognized it and I thought, wow, I wonder who played basketball in the family. And this is my stepfather's family. And I reached out to you via LinkedIn and asked if you might be able to help me identify this in 10 minutes.
Yeah, because what's crazy is if you do enough research and you have these photos and stuff, you start recognizing them. You start recognizing the people. And so I looked at it, I was like, yeah, that's Hampton. Because because you can tell, if you look closely enough, you can see some Native American faces in there. And Hampton was connected. When it was first formed, it was actually a place where the U.S. government sent Native Americans to become Americanized or civilized or what have you
And so that was part of that history. But they also turned out to be excellent basketball players. And Hampton at the time, especially around this time, 1912, 1914, had excellent teams. And so, I talk about that. And so when I saw that, then I just looked up a couple of the other Hampton photos that I have, and I was like, yeah, that's Hampton.
So as soon as you said Hampton Institute, I knew who the relative was, but I wouldn't have recognized him until you sent the captioned photo with his name, with all the names. Because I was looking at older photos of him as an older person. I was thinking, oh, it could be him or it could be him. But so thank you for that. More history. This is the next month we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Title IX Act. Which basically levels the playing field for the sexes in education at any institution that receives federal funding. So, for me, it's fascinating that the number of women who play, girls and women who play sports, has really grown astronomically in the past 50 years. So much so that I really thought women didn't do sports, but clearly they did, because we had women's basketball teams, Black Fives women's teams too.
Yeah, no, that's right. And so the sport started with the idea that it was strictly amateur, and that these teams were playing for camaraderie and social club spirit, but also there was this movement that was the physical culture movement, which was about making sure, so black leaders felt that in order to combat tuberculosis and
what did you say, the death rate was 25% or something?
Yeah, the mortality rate was 25% among black people. And because of this overcrowding, because of the Great Migration and what was happening, I couldn't really talk about basketball unless I first talked about the overcrowding. And then you can't talk about the overcrowding until you talk about, well, why was it overcrowded? And then you say, well, okay, that's because people were leaving the South. So I have to talk about why they were leaving the South. And so one thing leads to another. And so it becomes like being on a basketball train, but when you look out the window, you see black history. That's the scenery. And so that's what this book is. But what they did at the beginning was they had these men's teams like the Smart Set, but they also had a sister team. So the sister team of the Smart Set was the Spartan Girls, and the sister team of the Afro Physical Culture Club in Manhattan was the New York Girls, and they played the New Jersey Girls, and they had other amazing teams like the Philadelphia Tribune Girls, who were sponsored by the black newspaper, the Philadelphia Tribune, which is still in existence. And they won 11 straight women's, what they called colored national championships. And one of the stars was this woman, Ora Washington.
Notice 3 letters different from my name.
Yeah, and she's also in the Hall of Fame. And one of the things that we do, with our foundation, the mission is that we research, preserve, showcase, teach, and honor the pre-NBA history of African Americans in basketball. And why that's important is that we want to make sure that we're honoring and telling the stories all throughout. So there are definitely women's teams, but on this specific team, one of the things we did was we've been lobbying and advocating for the enshrinement of and proper recognition of pioneers into the Hall of Fame. And so over the last 11 years or so, we've been able to succeed in getting 11 pioneers into the Hall of Fame, or helping advocate for that, and they were enshrined, including Ora Washington, who after her career with the Tribune Girls ended up retiring from basketball and becoming a maid, and then she died with nobody knowing anything about her. And so she's now the oldest, earliest female enshrinee in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And so that's really important because there she is. Like I feel proud that we helped get her in, but it takes more research, right? This is just the beginning of more.
What would you like people to take away from this? This is clearly about more than basketball. It's about so much more.
Well, it's about redemption. It's about, how is it that this history was buried, and then what can we do to help bring it back alive? Who were some of these individuals, and what were their stories? And just, I want people to be pulled into it so that they can understand, what it was like. It's almost, somebody said it's like if you're old enough to appreciate the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, but for black basketball, or Roots, but for black basketball. Because, and if you're a nerd, this is like going to the hexadecimal level of the black basketball genesis. Like, where did it actually come from? Not just, oh, there was this team, but exactly how did it start? Like, where did Bob Douglas come from, and what was his life like in St. Kitts before he came to America, and so on. And so it just, I hope that you get the idea that, wow, this is, it's righting a wrong. All around the world, we have a partnership with Puma, and we have different merchandise and stuff, and everywhere, like from South Africa to Germany to Italy to France to Tokyo to Australia, but also to New Orleans and Baltimore and Brooklyn, people are posting about this and talking about it. And they're not just saying, hey, look at this cool hoodie. They're saying, look at this cause behind this. And I think that's because people feel like they want to correct something. There's something that's unfair, and they want to right that. You can't change history, but you can change what we do with history. So our slogan is "Make History Now."
I see that. Make history now. You said that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, I'd like to know what you are planning next. I have an assignment for you, I think,
Okay.
because I've been on Ancestry for a long time, and I find nothing. I don't know, how the name Washington just isn't conducive to finding. So what's next for you?
Well, we're in development now with a Hollywood media company called Propagate, that's run by the guy that was behind The Office. And then they've partnered with Russell Westbrook's media firm called Zero World Media for a documentary series that we're looking at now, just in the creative stages. And then I think as an organization, we want to keep growing and building and hiring and keep going in that direction. We're looking at setting up something called the Black Fives Academy, which would be a way of teaching people how to teach this history. Because there's only so many of me, so every Black History Month I get a call from a team or something, and they're like, hey, can you come talk to us? But I think there's much more to this history than just what one person can teach, right? So that's it. And then I don't know. I mean, I left a lot of loose ends in here on purpose, so that maybe there might be another sequel. Who said that? Exactly. Right. There's enough there for that, because I'm telling you, this is just the beginning of the information that's available.
I could see it as a series, following. There's so many characters whose lives are all over. The world. I think it would be really fascinating for me from a history perspective and from a New York perspective. How are we on time is it time for Q&A?
One more question first.
One more question?
Yeah.
Okay. So my last question for you then is, I have heard a lot about the, Negro League baseball teams. Why is it that we know so much about that, and that's so celebrated, but this is so forgotten?
Part of it is just the timing. So when the NBA was formed in 1949, they went off in their own direction. The two leagues that merged, basically none of their prior history mattered at that point. And then the Globetrotters, who were used to playing the double headers before NBA games to help them, or BAA games, Basketball Association of America, they were helping bring crowds to these games. After that happened, they went their own direction into more like entertainment, comedy, touring Europe, Asia. And then HBCUs started growing, and so a lot of the talent went to HBCU conferences. So there was really no reason after that to celebrate, versus with the Major League Baseball genre, those teams played each other, and there was a lot of stats and other reasons to celebrate going way back, even to the 1800s. And there were so many more Negro Leagues players that ended up in the majors. So in 1950, when the first 3 African American players were signed, they hadn't really played on these teams. One of them, 2 of them did, but that was it. So they were the last ones.
Interesting. So the baseball players kind of carried their history with them through to the integrated teams.
Yeah, and they also, those teams that Negro Leaguers played against continued and just existed, right? So Negro League teams played against all the major league teams for decades and decades and decades, and so that didn't really go away. Whereas almost all the NBA teams hadn't existed before. And so that history kind of got lost. And that's one of the reasons I talk about in my book why the league was not formed in 1946. It's not actually the 75th anniversary. Because if you say 1946, then you erase at least 14 prior African American players who played in the National Basketball League. Some of those NBL teams still exist in the NBA today. So you're erasing people like William Dolly King, who actually, if you go to the 2 slides forward, Dolly King's photo is in the Barclays Center as a mural that we provided, and these are his descendants.
One of them
One of them is John King, who was the Secretary of Education under President Obama. He's now running for governor in the state of Maryland. But you eliminate the whole history of Dolly King, who helped break the color barrier in the National Basketball League in 1946, playing for the Rochester Royals, which are now the Sacramento Kings. So why would you just turn your back on that? So I get into that here. So I know it may not be popular, but since when has a book ever been,
When was this installation?
This was in 2014.
So when Barclays opened?
When Barclays opened, yeah, which was a whole another magical story of how that happened.
And so these are all Brooklyn players that you were featuring?
That's right. Okay. So there was a committee when Barclays first went up. Jay-Z, Sean Carter was on that committee, and some other people and some art curators. And one of those art curators knew about my collection of historical photos, and they said, well, do you have anything that's basketball related, African American, Brooklyn? And so we provided a compilation of 6 images they blew up to mural size. And so anytime you go in Barclays, you'll see all those images.
They're still there.
They're still there. They're permanently installed. And so we do tours there, and players are involved, and we walk through there with Salvation Army or other groups. And we're still, looking to do more with the Nets and with other teams as well.
I think you have one more slide.
The one before that is, this is the cover photo. This is the New York Incorporators, and that man in the middle with the carnation and the high collar is a man named Will Anthony Madden, and he's the person who's buried in Linden, New Jersey, without a marker. But now, it's on its way. So I think that people will really appreciate it. It's got a. Thank you. And I have to say that, as I was following this individual and writing about it, like he's the through thread because he lived during 9 decades, and so I used his life sort of as a vehicle or as a mechanism for continuing this whole history, all the things that happened along the way. And it really, I hope, reads like a novel after all, because there's an ending, and I don't want to give it away, so I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so I know we had a question in the center of the room.
And just raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic.
Well, here we have a question right here.
Hi, Claude. I'm about 7 chapters in on the audiobook, so thanks.
Nice.
I haven't finished, but it's question is, I was amazed at how much historical research has gone into it, to be honest. I was not expecting it, which is, to have African-American studies departments, there have to be historians out there that must look at this, that their eyes must bug out, because this is an incredible achievement. Have you talked to anybody, any historians or any other academics about it?
Well, the thing is, I don't know if people have had time to read it yet, right? So it's because it's going to take a while. It's very dense. It's much longer than a typical book that's historical, and it's heavy. The subject matter is heavy. So I hope that as it starts to launch out, because it only came out last week, that African American studies. I would like NBA players to take a look at this, because we have LeBron is King James, right? But if the king of black basketball is now buried in an unmarked grave, then that should tell us that there's more to this than just the game, and that our legacy and what we do with this history is important. And so that's what LeBron's actually doing, right? So I hope that it's fitting and also instructive as to what can happen and how close we were to losing all this history. And you'll read about it in the pages, like how that baton was passed and how it actually happened, and how that was saved. So I think the more people read it, the more people will say, there's something we can do with this, I hope. Thank you for that question.
Hi. Are there any plaques where some of the first basketball games were played, or any type of physical memento?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. We've been lobbying frankly, the Brooklyn Nets and other organizations to put a plaque at the corner of Gates and Knickerbocker, for one. But there's other places where events happened. We just did, thanks to the Harlem Cultural Archives, we just did a street, not we, but I participated in the celebration of a street co-naming up in Harlem where the Renaissance Ballroom used to be. And so they renamed that southeast corner of West 138th and 7th, which is Adam Clayton Powell, to New York Wren's Court. So I hope that now becomes a worldwide rendezvous spot. Meet me at New York Wren's Court. Thank you to Glenn Hunter from the Harlem Cultural Archives for rolling that out.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about, is there any curriculum in the works for kids? And also, I'd love to know, through your foundation, if there's been any reaction from young people so far. I know that the book is just out, but you've been working on this for a long time. So if you could talk about
well,
that.
100% of the young people that live in my household said, that's dope. They said, that's sick. But actually, there's been a tremendous amount of great reaction. And because one of the people who wrote the blurb on the back of the book is Sam Presti, who's one of the most highly renowned, I guess, or just highly respected is the word I was looking for, GMs in the NBA. wrote a very nice piece about it, which means that thank you, which I hope, that sets it off the right way. We don't have a curriculum, but that's what we're aiming to do through this Black Fives Academy idea, is to have, we've actually gathered a group of people who include elementary, middle school, high school, AAU coach, professors, and people who are academicians, right? Because I know this information, but that doesn't mean I know how to create a teaching guide or anything like that. And we also have an online museum, courtesy of Puma, who sponsored it. So we have now a way to take all these artifacts and display them, on our website. And that's going to take on a new form too, because now we can be in the metaverse, we can do all these things that, like, wouldn't it be cool to have an online museum in the metaverse that you can walk through and see all these artifacts? So, don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but there's that too.
So congratulations and thank you for this.
Thank you very much.
So what would be the one thing that you would want a reader to walk away? So I'm gonna buy this, and I'm not a huge basketball fan, but this is amazing for us. So what would be the one thing that you would want any reader to walk away with?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, for me, I want it to be a love affair with the Black communities where basketball emerged, right? Because you can't just say, oh, and then there was the South Side of Chicago, and there was this team. Well, but what was it about the South Side? Like, why exactly did this team emerge? How did it happen? So I'm taking the reader, ideally, onto the streets, into the lifestyle. Like, what was it like to live there? What were the historical things that were happening that impacted those people? Some of these places are gone now. Some of these neighborhoods are gone now. But there's remnants, and so I really felt attached to those places. So it focuses on Pittsburgh. If you're familiar with Pittsburgh, it's Homestead and the Hill District. Here it focuses on Harlem, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. In Washington, D.C., it focuses on Southwest and the Shaw District. And in Chicago, primarily on the South Side, Bronzeville. But again, I think it's because my grandparents lived on the South Side of Chicago, and they would tell us stories about how they left Louisiana to escape lynching, and they didn't tell us why they left, but through my research, I found out that that's what it was. And so they would tell us these stories about how they had to leave their land behind that they owned, and I just felt like, who's speaking for them? That's why, like, another part of this is like the voicelessness that I seem to encounter everywhere you read this history. It's like, who's speaking for these people? And then I realized, well, that's all of us. Like, everyone is voiceless in some way and needs help with their voice. Like, just the writing of this book was that way, So then I talk about not only the inception, the places, the people, and I want people to just say, wow, this was an interesting dude, like, I can see how he's complex and I don't really get it. Why did you do that? I wouldn't have done that, but he did that, and this is why that was important, and just get into the individuals, and hopefully that will, inspire everybody to just realize, like, we're all in this,
I'm going to look at Carlton Avenue in a new light.
Yeah. Carlton, and because Bedford, it used to be Bedford, and then Stuyvesant Heights, and now it's Bed-Stuy, but back then it was all white, and some of these people lived on those blocks. Sometimes they were the only Black people on those blocks, and so things change and morph, and the same thing goes for other parts of America as well.
One more question here, and then we'll go to Zoom questions.
Thank you. To the end of getting the word out to people, is your book available, or will it be available in NBA and WNBA arenas?
In a WNBA?
NBA and WNBA arenas. Will your book be for sale there?
That's a great question, and I'm gonna deflect that question to Adam Silver. Is he here?
There he is.
and I'm going to deflect it to the teams of the NBA and the WNBA. And also, we're in touch, and our first grant that we got as a nonprofit was from the NBA Players Union Foundation. And so, they're friends of ours, and we hope that, because people don't realize the NBA is the NBA, but it's also it's really the league office, the teams, and then the players. And a lot of the incentive and the voice and the platform and the drive for social justice causes comes from the players. So for me, that's sort of the place to start. And I think, they've embraced us. And then also Puma, very generously, every sneaker company has an influencer list. And they send out amazing VIP packages to their influencers. And they offered to send my book out in that packet to those influencers, which you can look up who they are, but there's NBA players in there, entertainers and others. And so that's a way to, I hope that those boxes get opened and people go, wow. And if you don't want to read it, it's available as an audiobook, narrated by the author. And I had a lot of fun doing that.
How long did that take?
That took several weeks. It took about 40 hours of recording, and they condensed it down to, I think it's 22 hours, which is about how long it takes to drive from here to Louisiana, where my grandparents lived. And speaking of those long trips, I just want to make this one point, which is that one of the we're in touch with descendants, and one of the descendants told me this story about the New York Harlemites, which was a team that ironically was based out of St. Louis, and they were traveling up in Montana on a barnstorming trip in 1936, and their entourage, which was their car, was caught in a blizzard. And that week, the temperatures in that area were minus 40 degrees. And so they got stuck, and they had to walk several miles, and they were rescued by a sheep herder who brought them into his cottage. Eventually they were hospitalized, and they had frostbite, and it was so bad that their hands had to get bandaged up. But they didn't skip a beat. They just played the next game on their schedule with bandages on their hands. But one of them got frostbite so bad that he got gangrene and eventually died. But the newspaper said, well, they played well despite the loss of their teammate, from gangrene. So it was just like, okay. But the point I'm making here is, that was in the name of basketball, and it was not because of the money making. It was also that helped popularize the sport itself in Montana, literally, and in places that were far out, Pacific Northwest. There were women's teams that barnstormed out that far. And so we owe a great deal of gratitude and just understanding of what did they actually do. And it's so kind of cliche to say, well, they paved the way. But I kind of want to know, okay, but what does that mean? Like how? What? What did they do exactly? And I want people to know, like, what exactly was that?
That is a great story, because it definitely demonstrates and illustrates how they paved the way with their, bodies
Literally,
and their lives to popularize it, because it certainly is popular.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
so much.
we have a question from. We'll just do 2 Zoom questions. This one's from Irma Watkins Owens. What was the role of Caribbean immigrants, such as the player you mentioned from St. Kitts, in the early Black basketball movement?
Dr. Watkins Owens is a tremendous scholar of Caribbean American immigration and life in New York City and elsewhere, and I definitely cited her book. And one of the things that I talk about a lot is Bob Douglas, who was the owner and founder of the New York Renaissance team in Harlem, was from St. Kitts. So I talk about what life was like in St. Kitts that would make him want to leave. And by focusing on him, it's really also saying why everybody wanted to leave the Caribbean at that time and come to America. And not just anywhere in America, but New York City specifically. And then what was life like for West Indians in New York City? And what were the resources that were available to help people assimilate? And then, specifically, a lot of West Indians moved up to an area that was called San Juan Hill, which is almost where Lincoln Center is now. And so how did that all work? And then that was juxtaposed on the migration of black people from Midtown Manhattan and Village, Midtown, eventually migrating up to Harlem by way of San Juan Hill, and how that all happened, and the churches and the differences, and just trying to understand how that all worked, because the Renaissance Ballroom got its name because the owner was a fellow West Indian who agreed with Bob Douglas, hey, I'll let you play here if you change the name of your team to our ballroom name. So that's how the Renaissance came to be, and I talk about that. And then just the faction that controlled black basketball in the early days was primarily West Indian.
Really?
Yeah, and there was a fight between the West Indians, who were focused on pure amateurism, and the popularity of the sport, which suddenly people started realizing, well, wait, there's money to be made here. But the way that basketball was organized at first through the YMCA, it was mostly, mind, body, spirit. So the idea of getting paid to play was kind of it was almost blasphemy, because that's not what it was meant for. So there was this sort of struggle between the forces of amateurism, the force of professionalism, and a lot of that dynamic had to do with the West Indians, who were not only controlling the media, but also the game and other things that happened. I'm not going to give it all away, but it evolves. So that's the importance of the West Indian contribution.
All right, one more question. This one's from Martin Shirk. Does any of this history extend to west of Chicago?
That's a great question, and it does, because some of these teams barnstormed west of Chicago. One of the women's teams actually that was out of Chicago was called the Club Store Coeds, and on the road they were known as the Chocolate Coeds, and they would travel to Omaha and the Pacific Northwest and even up into Canada, and they featured a 6'7" center named Helen Smith. Her nickname was Streamline, and she was billed as the tallest woman in the world. But they were so good that at one point no women's teams agreed to play them, so they just played men's teams. They beat 41 men's teams in a row at one point, on their way traveling around. And so that was, so there was a lot of that. Yes, there were teams that eventually formed in Iowa and elsewhere further west, California. So I don't go into as much of that because it's mostly focused on these 4 cities, but that's why I'm saying there's some loose ends that I've left open that might end up being, that we can play off of, in the future.
Well, congratulations again, Claude.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.